Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've been invited here today to talk to you about a success story. I'm in a very fortunate position to be able to say to you that I've actually got a choice of subject because as an entrepreneur I've set up a number of successful companies. However, the one I'm going to talk about today is actually the custom bake company. Every success story and every successful business is really based upon one thing, I think, and one principle. And that's what I want to briefly explain to you today and how this fits into that. But basically, most things that are successful, whether it's a business, whether it's small, large business, whether it's not a business at all, just in personal life, is finding a solution to a problem. And as an example, a problem in the United States on the border, and I do apologise if you've heard this before because I didn't come up with this myself, illegal Mexicans are crossing the Mexican and US border. So what is the solution to that? You dig a moat all the way down the border. There's a problem in New Orleans with they're still vulnerable to hurricanes, so what do? You take the dirt that you dug out from the moat and you fill around the New Orleans to build the levees up. There's also a problem in Florida with alligators. They're still killing, eating, doing other things to people. So what do? You get those alligators and you put them in the moat that you dug in the first place. Basically, there is a moral to this, behind this, or a theme. And whilst inspiration and planning and developing and goal setting is all very important, along with passion and belief, there is a key theme to everything that has made me successful, and that's creating a win-win situation in every single thing that I do. What I want to do is just to use the custom bake company as an example and just demonstrate how I brought that win-win scenario into every single thing that I did, which makes it successful. The inspiration, the planning and the developing of it, the goals and the strategy, and definitely my passion and belief in anything that I actually do. Inspiration for the custom bake company began when I was in my early 20s, and I already had a successful and was running a successful business at the time in having my own nursing home. I had recently-ish given birth to my second son, and after that I discovered that he was very, very ill, but nobody knew what was actually wrong with him. So after a lot of toing and froing and going back and forwards to different hospitals locally, which was in Dorset at the time, I then took him up to Great Ormond Street Hospital and saw the different specialists up there who diagnosed him straight away. And we're talking 20 odd years ago, he actually had a very severe food allergy and food intolerance. He was initially I was told originally that he had cystic fibrosis, which thankfully was incorrect. But he was my inspiration for the custom bake company. And the reason for that was because once he'd been diagnosed at Great Ormond Street, they said, right, we know the problem. He can't have any dairy, he can't have any soya, and he can't have any eggs. Come back and see us in 6 months and we'll see how he's doing. Or not quite like that, but not far off. So I went away and I thought, how am I going to feed him? Because soya and these ingredients are in everything. And when you have a child that is allergic to all of these things, you soon discover that they can't eat bread, they can't eat cake, they can't eat biscuits, they can't eat bisto, they can't eat sausages, they can't eat fish fingers, everything has these ingredients in it. So I then thought, he can't be the only one. There's a lot of people out there that have this intolerance, and what do? Because they can't go and buy stuff either, because there is nowhere. And then I started thinking that not only could I not buy the stuff for him and for his specific illness, but there are other illnesses that are also food related such as you've got diabetes, you've got celiac disease, endless really. And that's where the business opportunity idea came to me, because I was not going to let my son go without whatever. He was going to eat the same looking food as everybody else, even if it didn't contain the same ingredients. And that's when the custom bake company was born. The product itself was actually to start with, dried mixes. So there was, did different breads. There was bread made from gluten-free flour, bread made from without soya, because shop-bought bread contains soya and he couldn't have soya. Cookies, cake mixes, that kind of thing. So it started out with dried baked mix. And my customer base was potentially huge, because there are many, many people who couldn't eat this, couldn't eat that, needed to avoid this for whatever reason, including diabetics, needed to have something that was suitable for their diet. Celiacs couldn't have the wheat and or the gluten, and so on. So I had potentially a very large customer base. But how was I going to make my brand aware, build the awareness of it for everybody that I could potentially sell to? And again, as I mentioned earlier, back 20 odd years ago, if you had a food allergy, or you told anyone you had a food allergy, you were thought as a little bit odd. So I had to build on that and thought, how can I build a business with something that potentially people are thinking, I'm not sure that there's anything really there, it's a little bit, odd. So what I decided to do was, Great Ormond Street had diagnosed my son, and Great Ormond Street saw many, many patients that they were diagnosing with similar type of illnesses. So I went back to Great Ormond Street because I wanted to work in collaboration with them and to work with their dietitians so that they were happy with what I was doing, and I could actually use them to promote what I was doing as brand awareness. And that's a win-win situation, because they now have somebody that they have confidence in, because they are there to support me as their dietitian with what I'm actually doing. But they have somewhere now that they can send their patients and people that have otherwise nowhere else to go for their goods. So that's what I did. But it went much beyond that, because obviously at the beginning I wasn't planning a business when my son became ill, and I already had one and I was already running a full-time business. But I decided that yes, I still needed to advertise further and beyond Great Ormond Street Hospital. And I needed everybody nationally to know about what I was doing. But I didn't have a budget. So I decided the next thing to do is to get free marketing and free advertising. And the best way of doing that is to approach major publications of magazines, articles, things like that, and newspapers, which is exactly what I did. I produced stories for them and contacted them and said, look, I've written this story, I'd like you to read it because I think it will be of interest to your readers and therefore increase your readership, and you're supplying a service because these people don't have anywhere to go. And do you know what? I'll even give you a recipe as well that you can publish. And everybody bit my hand off. So they all put in. People like the good BBC Good Food, Country Living, Daily Telegraph did double-page spreads for me. The advertising was enormous and it cost me nothing, absolutely nothing, apart from my time and energy. So I built my product and I built my business by creating a win-win situation, because I was filling a need that really was there. And obviously building on the problem as well, because making people realise that they have a problem and getting them to realise that they had a problem is pretty important. My promotion was done in collaboration and building partnerships. I also had a column in the local newspaper, Blackmore Vale, and I wrote in it every single week on all different types of subjects, food related, but would give advice, that kind of thing, which was being monitored by Great Ormond Street Hospital. and the dietitian. I also wrote for the Great Ormond Street Hospital magazine as well. Put something in there each month. Sorry. The growth of the business came about. I moved from dried mixes to providing people who didn't want to make stuff for themselves and they wanted it ready-made. So I started doing ready-made products as well. But my son was coming up for his birthday, and that started another line to the business, if you like, in that he was not going to miss out on his birthday cake, whatever. I was going to, and I literally stood there and experimented to make a cake. And dare I say it, ladies probably know this more than men, but to try and make a cake with no egg, no butter, and no milk is no mean feat. But I did. And I started a decorated cake business in the same company, so supplying cakes. The most memorable cake was actually for a couple that was getting married, and it'll show my age now, back at the Falklands War. And this soldier was being called out to the Falklands War, and he was about to get married, but he'd been called out to the Falklands War. So they wanted a rush job, basically, of a wedding cake. So they decided to get married before he went. And I had 3 days' notice. And they said, anything will do, just a sponge cake will do. It doesn't matter whether it's decorated or not. But what I used to do is, because I had the backbone of the business, which was ready-made goods and what have you anyway, I just used one of those and decorated it, and it was a proper decorated wedding cake, and they were absolutely over the moon. So that's a nice story. My exit strategy was actually to sell out to my supplier. They supplied me with the raw ingredients for me to make these mixes, and I was at the point where I needed to expand. But bearing in mind, I was already running my own nursing home, so there is only one of me, which my husband is probably really glad of. So I decided to sell out, and what I did was I said to the company, that's fine, but I need a solicitor to draw up the legal documents, and you have to pay for it. You want my company? You pay for it. So they did. So they paid for my solicitor as well, drew it all up, and I got royalties from the sale of it, basically. Something I am very passionate about is be passionate in what you believe in, and believe in what you're passionate about. In many other businesses, I have asked along the way, what is it about me, or what I've done, or what I've said, or about my company that made you use my company? What is it that makes you buy from me? And every single time, in every single industry, in every situation, people have said, it's your passion and it's your belief. Every single time. And I would say that the key thing is being passionate and having belief, and creating that win-win situation. After I sold that out, you might think, what do I do today? And indeed, what has it got to do with apprenticeships? What I now do today, and you'll see in the bottom corner of the screen, is a company called Inspirited. I now do training. I've written many training manuals and many training programs, designed online training programs, and although apprenticeships help the younger generation, and indeed some of the elder population as well, it's ongoing training as well, and people who are already in a job or already in a career, but they want to progress or they need to progress, and that's certainly something that is a growth industry currently. So that's what I do now, is actually train people on what made me successful in the various businesses that I've done, and train them on their various business skills. So although my route to success is to be inspired, to plan, another favourite saying is plan to fail, fail to plan. Set your goals, know exactly where you're going to go and how you're going to get there, because if you get there and you haven't, how will you know you've got there? Work that one out. And be passionate, be very passionate in what you do. But always, always think win-win and create a win-win situation, because then who can say no? Thank you very much for listening.
That was really inspiring.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to ask, when you started sort of this, having to sort of come up with food to feed your son, were you a fan of cooking, or was that part of your background, or did you sort of start from scratch?
It kind of started from scratch. I've always enjoyed cooking. And no offence to my poor mother, but if you ever tasted her food, and my husband will back me on this, in fact the whole family will, if you've ever tasted my mother's food, you'd know why I learnt to cook. So I learnt to cook. I think the driving force, specifically for this, was that my son was not going to go to a party and sit and watch other children eat food that he couldn't eat. And I was going to find food that he could eat and not feel very different, as they say, really. So that was the biggest driving force. In fact, when he did get invited to parties, I'd phone them up and ask them, what food are you having at the party? And she'd say, oh, we're having egg sandwiches and we're having butterfly cupcakes, whatever it was. And I would make exactly the same, but suitable for him. And it got to the point that because I took pleasure in what I was doing, that's how a lot of the catering started, because people were saying, all the children were saying, I don't want that, I want what he's having. And that's how that started. So, but working out the recipes was my own sort of science experiment, if you like. Literally, because there was nowhere to go, there was no advice, so I literally had to think, if I'm not going to use this, what else could do the job of that? And that's how I did it.
Okay, so you then get into the dried good mix, yeah? Where did you find, because obviously you then had to find the alternatives, so where did you then find those suppliers to help you with the dried mixes?
Around about that time, as you know, you certainly couldn't go to a supermarket, not without a bag on your head and, you know, pretending it's not you. So I actually went to health food stores. That's where I went. And at that time, Cranks, which is why they were called Cranks, was quite famous. But they actually did, Cranks were more vegetarian. But it gave me inspiration, if you like, of yes, you can still do really good food and alternatives without having to use the food that he couldn't eat. But it was mainly going to the health food stores, seeing what they had there and seeing who it was produced by, and then finding the producer and going to them, because obviously I wasn't going to bulk buy from the health food store, but I just went there because I didn't have computers to look it up, so I could do that then.
Every business has costs, and you started as a sole trader. So how did you manage to keep the costs low, to keep going?
Smiling sweetly. It was purely and simply putting hard work into it, but that's why the win-win situation in this situation was absolutely key, because everything was, I'll promote you and I'll promote you as a supplier. Give me, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to use this ingredient, I need to, give me some samples and I'll see what I can do with it. So they gave me the food, or the raw ingredients, and certainly for the advertising and that kind of thing, and that's where that's how it started really, because I just didn't have a budget, because obviously I wasn't anticipating starting a second business. So it was finding that win-win situation and creating a win-win situation, that there's something in it for them at the same time as I was getting what I needed.
I think it's a wonderful, wonderful policy, a miniature of a bigger perspective, that creating a win-win situation. Without technical knowledge of catering industry, did you find that difficult to start off something?
Not necessarily, because one of the things that I always do, and hence the reason why in the training programs that I do now, I've sat a huge number of courses for someone who said when they left school they were never going to do another exam again. It's a little bit like when I had the nursing home. Because I had the nursing home, I was already aware of health and safety, and if you have a kitchen, what the requirements are, and things like you mustn't have your washing machine in the kitchen if you're doing it from home, which is what it was at the time. And that's basically, it was just doing research, which is now, as I say, doing the training. That's what I do a lot of.
I think it's inspiration for those people who don't have the technical knowledge of a field. I was trying to come to that. That you don't have to have a technical knowledge of a field to really shine in that. I'm not talking about surgeons or doctors or space astronauts. I'm talking about fields which can be, you have some knowledge, but with reading and learning, you can gain more. So you can still do a successful business in that, and you're one example for that. Which I really vouch. Last one from me. Have you ever thought, or had you ever thought of actually not selling it and keeping it? And if that was a thought, then why? Had you thought of keeping the company at some stage, not selling it, and continuing with that?
Not really, because...
it could have grown much bigger.
It could have, but I was quite happy because that wasn't... It was almost, it sounds a bit flippant to say that it was almost a side thought or a sideline. Well, it was, because I had my nursing home business at the time. It wasn't something that I was going to do for the rest of my life, and my own personal belief is that certainly if you're entrepreneurial, you never stick really to one thing and just stay in that. You do it, you develop it, you sell it on, and you should always have an exit strategy. You should always be able to say to someone, I want to be here in 5 years and I want to be there in 10 years. Doesn't matter if you are or not, but you've got to have a clear set of ideas of, clear vision ahead. And I think as an entrepreneur, you don't tend to stay in one industry, because you make a success of one thing, you then pass your success on and you help someone else build their business and build their success, and you're on to the next one.
I think it's a wonderful example of success must not beat more success. Thank you.
Any more questions?